You're listening to You First, the Disability Rights Florida podcast. In this episode, I'm chatting with Jen Deernwater about the experiences of individuals who identify with both disability and Indigenous communities. Hey everyone, I'm Maddie.
And I'm Keith, and we're the hosts of You First.
Today, we're happy to have on Jen Deernwater. Jen is a bisexual, two-spirit, multiply disabled citizen of Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma and an award-winning journalist and organizer who covers a myriad of issues her community faces with an intersectional lens. Jen is the founding executive director of Crushing Colonialism and a 2019 New Economies Reporting Project and a 2020 Disability Futures Fellow.
Jen's writing is included in anthologies such as Disability Visibility, the forthcoming CRIP authorship Disability as Method, among many other things. Jen is the co-editor of the anthology Sacred and Subversive and is currently hard at work on her own book.
Jen is a vital advocate and change maker within disability, Indigenous, and environmental justice movements. During the conversation, Jen discusses paving the way to create a Native media organization, combating ableism and invisibility, and highlighting upcoming opportunities and new resources developing for disabled Native folks.
This episode is sure to be a thought-provoking and informative discussion that you won't want to miss. So grab a cup of tea, sit back, and enjoy the show.
Hi, Jen. Welcome onto the podcast. We're so excited to have you on today. So just take a few moments to introduce yourself.
Hello, OCO. So I am a citizen of the Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma. I'm a freelance journalist. I'm the founding executive director of Crushing Colonialism, which is a small Indigenous created and led 501c3. So we're a nonprofit organization that works on Indigenous media and storytelling. I'm also openly bi and two-spirit, and I am multiply disabled with chronic pain and fatigue and autoimmune issues and a whole host of things.
Yeah, thank you so much for that introduction. It's really wonderful to have you on the podcast today. So you hinted a little bit at your role as the executive director of Crushing Colonialism. So could you tell us a bit more about that org and other work that you like to center at Crushing Colonialism?
Yeah, so I started the organization in 2016. That's when I began working as a journalist. And I just felt like there were a lot of supports and resources that I needed as a multiply marginalized Native journalist that I wasn't finding in any space, not in professional journalist organizations, writing organizations. I just wasn't coming across it because in every space I go, one form or another of isms or oppressions were coming up. Coming to bat, basically. I started talking to other Indigenous media makers, other storytellers. And something that's interesting about our organization is that we do kind of straddle this divide between arts and media because we recognize that Indigenous storytelling is a traditional value and that it comes in different forms. It may be beading, it may be oral storytelling, it could be pottery. So I spoke to different people across disciplines and just kind of listened to what do they feel like they have needed either when they were first starting out or mid-career or they're later in life. And I heard a lot of the same things. We need representation. We need money. We need this. It was the resources that are out there, but that Native people just aren't getting. So that's how Crushing Colonialism came about. We got our nonprofit status last year. And so we did a ton of virtual programming in 2020, and we took some time off to just work on getting a really solid base, building our board of directors, doing some more fundraising work, the things that you have to do to really get up and running before you can go on doing successful programming for years to come. But we are going to be announcing some really big programming. So I'm really excited about where things are going to go.
Yeah, I'm excited to hear more about that. I'm a huge fan of Crushing Colonialism, and DRF has shared some of those videos that y'all have done, whether that's over Zoom with different folks sharing their own lived experiences. There's different blogs. There's artwork on your site and on your various social media. So if folks aren't yet following Crushing Colonialism, that's like really where disability and indigeneity and so many other identities come to collide in such a meaningful space. So what does it mean to you to start that? Such a needed space. I feel like that's such a huge, but so meaningful responsibility. Like, how does that feel to you?
It's a mixed bag. I'm going to be honest. If I had realized just how hard it would be to start a nonprofit when you don't have seed money, I might not have done it. To be honest, it's been a lot of work. And a lot of that responsibility has fallen on my shoulders because there just wasn't money to pay people. And there still isn't. We still don't have staff. We have some money to pay contractors and consultants to help us out with some projects, but we're still growing. I'm really fortunate that I get to do this. And despite the marginalizations that I have, I do recognize that I have a certain level of social capital. And this is one of the ways that I can put that to work to bring resources to my communities. There are times though when I will say I get frustrated, I'm tired. I want to just sit and read a book for fun. I want to be able to actually take time to just recover from a surgery and not have to think about how things are going to get done for Crushing Colonialism while I'm in bed. It'd be nice to have more energy and time to focus on my own writing. But this space is needed. And as long as community wants it, I'm going to continue to try to put as much energy into it as I can to build it up and have something really stable that I can then pass on to other relatives to do the work.
It's an incredible organization. All of your hard work has really shown through. And yeah, I can't recommend it enough if folks aren't already checking out y'all's work. It really is some super fantastic stuff. So yeah, thank you so much for that beautiful background on how Crushing Colonialism has come to be and like your role in it. I think it's super interesting. And I appreciate your transparency too, because I think sometimes folks really have an intention of building a really meaningful space or a meaningful organization, but they just don't necessarily, you can't fathom how much labor is going to go into it until you actually get into it. But yeah, I just appreciate your transparency on that. And I kind of wanted to jump to another new and forming involvement that you're getting into, which is the NDRN, Intertribal Disability Advocacy Council. Disability Rights Florida is termed as a protection and advocacy agency for folks with disabilities living in the state of Florida, or what is now Florida. And that label essentially gives an organization like ours a lot of procedural and logistical legitimacy to be able to support folks with disabilities in our area. Now, there's different ones all over the country, and there's one in the Four Corners region near what is New Mexico. Anyways, so the Native American PNA formed this Intertribal Disability Advocacy Council, just giving background before I ask you questions on it, and sought out some folks, some disabled Native leaders to be involved in the council. So you recently joined, which is, I'm sure they were thrilled about because you're a huge get, but the program is really striving to center Native voices in disability spaces. And I'm curious, just based on your experience in the beginning, can you tell us a little bit about what the program is striving to do and how it's been meaningful for you so far?
Yeah, so I'm really excited to be a part of IDAC, the council. Part of what led to its formation is that American Indians and Alaskan Natives have the highest rates of disabilities per capita of any ethnic or racial group in this country, yet there's very little statistical data on us. We're very rarely included in studies. We're rarely included in policy. Our needs are pretty much almost entirely ignored by the non-Native disability community and by the able-bodied Native community. The federal government keeps our hands tied in many ways as tribal citizens. and as disabled people, but then also our own tribal governments don't advocate for us the way they should. So this council, we all came together. We come from different parts of the US, different tribes, urban, rural, different types of disabilities. And so we all came together so that we could put together listening sessions. So we're going to start holding listening sessions beginning in June, running through August, giving the opportunity for deaf, disabled, chronically ill, neurodivergent Native people to sit and talk with us about what some of their most pressing needs are. What do they feel like they need in order to have a good quality of life? Where do they feel like things may be lacking? And where do they feel like maybe things are good and things are going well? Because that's really important too. We need to know the good and the bad. And then the council is going to take all of this data and it's going to be crafted into a study, and that study is going to be presented to the federal government. Let me get into a couple other things that I want to make, points I want to make sure I make that kind of relate to IDAC.
Sure.
So there has been somewhat of a growing awareness amongst non-Native, non-Indigenous disability community of the needs to include disabled Native and Indigenous people. And there's a very tiny beginning kernels of knowledge within Native community about disability, but there's still a lot of disconnect. Disabled Natives still don't have a seat at the table, at either table. You know, within disability community, we're often brought in last minute. We're not brought in for leadership. We're not brought in for our ideas at the beginning of any kind of project. It's always we need to check that box. And what we have to say as Native people is never listened to. It's never listened to. I've left several disability spaces because I just, in the end, was like, I am just nothing more than a token to you all, and I'm out. But then within Native community, and there's some various reasons for this. One, disability, as we know it in this colonial context, it's not really an idea. It's not a way of being with any Native nations that I'm aware of anyway. You know, health and ability and disability and things are looked at differently. The value at one another is looked at differently because we think about us as a collective group of people, not just the individual. So everyone has worth and everyone has value. And that's a very different framework to start with, you know, and that's the traditional way anyway of a lot of tribes. So disability is just looked at differently. But also, it's been really frustrating to see Native organizations that have more than enough resources to do the bare minimum of disability access, not doing it, or including voices on disability, but those voices are not Native voices. In one instance, it was a white, able-bodied woman coming in and speaking on Native disability issues. That's just mind-boggling to me. So we still have a long, long, long way to go. And that's why I'm really happy IDAC, why this council exists and why I'm so excited to be a part of it, because it's actually disabled Native people coming together and doing this work and leading the charge.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for that background on IDAC and for kind of setting the groundwork for some of the other conversations we're going to continue to have throughout the podcast. And I think, could you maybe speak a little bit more to what conversations IDAC is going to continue to hopefully address when it comes to specific needs of Native folks, Native disabled folks, whether that's housing or economic access or physical access?
I think it's going to depend on what comes out of the listening sessions. I can say what I need, what resources I'm going without, what changes I would like to see both within my own tribe, Cherokee Nation, and then within federal government, you know, local government. I live in Washington, D.C. I can always say those things, but the idea is to listen to what other Natives have to say. We want to hear what they have to say. So we'll see. My experience as an urban Native living in DC is going to be vastly different of even another Cherokee Nation citizen living back home in a rural area of our reservation. So where we go with this is really going to depend on what happens with the listening sessions. But we are all really committed to getting this study put together and not just having it sit on a shelf somewhere, but actually using it to make change.
Yeah. I know I'm really excited to see how the listening sessions go and to center Native folks more so within the disability community and hopefully be able to transform that study and things to be more publicly known and for other disability organizations who want to be better about centering Native folks and including them, that they're hearing from Native folks themselves about what they need and what their hopes are for the community. You mentioned the disconnect between disability and Native identity and how things are just viewed differently from quote unquote American disability identity. And I think there's an interest and a want and a need for disabled organizations, whether it's organizations like mine, other orgs outside of the PNA network that really do or think they do want to center disabled Native folks. There is understandably some distrust in Native communities to trust non-Native and non-disabled Native like orgs. So I was just curious if you would be willing to speak a little bit to how non-Native disability orgs can start to better center Native disabled folks, whether that's starting with the listening sessions and supporting the study, but also like how maybe they could go about forming relationships and meaningful relationships with the nearby Native folks.
I would say that my advice is going to be very similar to what I actually told you maybe a year ago when you first reached out to me, is that one, it's about relationship building. It's not just about a one and done ask. Oh, we want you to do this talk and now we're out. If you really want Native people, then you need to build relationships with us. And that takes time. And you need to understand, just like you said, we are a fairly distrustful people for a lot of very obvious reasons. And then some that may not be so obvious to people. I also want to see people coming in and offering something, not just looking for something. It really frustrates me to have non-Native disabled organizations come to me asking me to sign on to letters, wanting Crushing Colonialism to sign on to letters, when they did not have a single Native person involved at all in any of the organizing. And sometimes the excuse I hear is we didn't have time. What do I say to that? Like, I don't feel I even have a professional response to we didn't have time.
Like, if you wanted to do it, you would. And if you had, you have time, there's no excuse.
Exactly. And it's also, and because also there are times where it's like there are quick turnarounds on maybe a letter to Congress or something, but that's also why you should be working on building relationships with us so that you already know us. We already have solidarity together. But that is not the way a lot of people operate, particularly within the disability rights community. I will say I have some frustration as well with the idea that, oh, any Indigenous person will do. They don't even have to be Indigenous to the U.S. As long as we have the one, it's okay. And it's not okay. Yeah. It's not okay. We are all different. You need to learn the local tribes. You need to learn the different Indigenous people within your regions. You can't just grab at any one of us expecting that will be okay. I really often feel like in many cases, I just have people coming to me with their hands out. Or like I said before, they come to me asking me to join committees and calls and things. And then when I speak up and give my opinion as a disabled Native, it's not listened to. Right. And that happens within able-bodied Native spaces and non-Native disabled spaces. If you don't want to hear my opinion, then don't invite me. Because if you haven't figured it out by now, I'm going to tell you what I think. So yeah, I think it's so frustrating to even have to say that. But if you really want the beauty and the pain and the struggle and the reality and the ingenuity of disabled Natives, then you need to come to us in the right way. And that can't just be coming to us with your hand out or when you need to check a checkbox for your funding applications. there's a better way to come to us and there's a better way to do things.
Yeah, certainly. And I know, like you mentioned, like Native folks aren't included, or if they are, it's an afterthought. And to just put it in perspective and then not to compare, but if you thought about any other marginalized group and you went across the world to find somebody of that marginalized group to then invite them to a council or a board that's in the state, like that doesn't make any sense at all. But it's unfortunately, like you said, a lived reality of something that you've experienced. I'm sure other disabled Native folks have experienced. And it's just like to really recenter what local and nearby Native folks to really ensure that the needs are being met and the voices are being heard of folks. So I appreciate your insight into that. And I was curious, is there necessarily a way that you would hope that in orgs, non-Indigenous and or maybe disabled orgs, instead of coming to you with their hands open, what would it look like to you for that to actually be a meaningful engagement? Is there an experience you've had in the past where nobody expected anything of you? They just came to you with resources and support without the expectation of anything back.
I don't want to say no, because I'm sure there have been, and I'm just not thinking of those moments right now. There are absolutely people in my life that, oh, hey, I saw this grant and thought of you, saw this call for submissions. Maybe this is of interest to Crushing Colonialism. Like, people do come to me with sharing resources and such, sharing fundraisers. I have a fundraiser going right now for Crushing Colonialism. June is my birthday month, and it's also to LGBTQIA Pride Month. So we're doing a fundraiser. So there are people in spaces and community that are genuinely there to help. Something that I would like to see more of, and I know this is hard when we're all in many ways so exhausted. We're all spread so thin. We're all under-resourced. But I really appreciate in those rare instances when people come to me and like, I know of you and I'd like to get to know you more. Do you want to do a virtual call? Do you want to get a coffee if we're in the same place together and it's safe with pandemics and such? I appreciate that. Yeah, I like that. I think it's always good to get to know each other on that kind of level. And that for me is where the work begins, because there is this nonprofit world in which some of us have to operate. And that does very easily get us lost within just getting the work done. But I don't do this because I want to be a nonprofit director or executive. I hate the nonprofit industrial complex. I just couldn't come up with grassroots funds to do it without foundation money. It was what I had to do. But for me, it's about that community building. It's cross movements, cross community, cross solidarity. It's just building up and coming together, because we're going to need to be there for each other. And it can't always be just within this nonprofit context of, hey, we need you to speak on a panel, or we want you on a committee. Sometimes it needs to be, hey, such and such, they need practical on the ground support. Do you know people? Can you help me with resources? We're going to have to do more and more of that as this world becomes more and more unstable due to a variety of issues, rise of fascism, climate crisis, take your pick.
Yeah, I think that's a really kind of good point to end this kind of quote unquote section of the conversation that we're having, because I think in the end, just reframing folks' perceptions on different intentions, whether that's going in with intentions of supporting Native folks or centering them or whatever it may be, if you're going into it without a non-Native value of community and support and finding meaning in each individual and distancing yourself from some of the individualism we have in different organizations in American society. If you're not going into it like honoring Native values, it's not necessarily going to resonate with the folks that you're going to be in contact with. Well, thank you for elaborating on that. And I think the theme of like community and like intention with Native values in mind, the main takeaway of what I would sum up like your answer.
Well, hello there, and welcome to Disability After Dark, the podcast shining a bright light on disability stories. I'm your host, disability awareness consultant, Andrew Gurza. This is a podcast where you sit down with your close disabled friends and talk about things in the disability experience that we never ever get to shine a light on. That's why it's called Disability After Dark. Each week, we'll explore everything from disability to ableism, to sexuality, and so much more, including things like disability grief, disability joy, and so many different conversation topics around the disabled experience. We even have special bonus content like Quarantine and Chill, a podcast within Disability After Dark where we explore the effects of the ongoing pandemic, or a Bumpin' podcast where we talk all about sex and disability and sex toys on the show. So tune in wherever you get your podcast, and let's shine a bright light on disability stories. Thanks, everybody. Bye!
Dating with a disability can be hard. I know that because I'd struggled for years to date successfully with a disability. Having cerebral palsy, I encountered many people not even considering me as a potential partner, and if they did, there were judgments and attitudes. But successful dating and finding a healthy, joyful relationship is totally possible. I finally figured out how to do this, and I have been with my husband for over 15 years now. The key is to keep trying, continue to go for what you want, despite the heartbreak and rejection, and believe in your potential as a dating and relationship partner. I know that sounds very simple, and it's not. That's why I created Dating Made Easier, the monthly membership that will teach you how to get the results you want, feel more comfortable and confident dating, and give you consistent support with monthly workshops, brainstorming, and networking. Go to radiantabilities.com/dating resources and join today.
So let's talk a little bit more about some other work that you're involved in. So in addition to the Intertribal Disability Advocacy Council, or we refer to as IDAC a little bit, you sit on the Planning Council for an urban HIV and AIDS care equity study for urban natives. So I would love for you to tell us a little bit more about this and how centering Native folks in healthcare and health equity conversations is so essential to not just Native folks, but everybody's wellness.
Yeah, so this group is part of a study being done by Johns Hopkins University and Native American Lifelines, which is a small Indian health service reimbursement organization. So they're under Urban Indian Health. They're not a full ambulatory IHS clinic, but they do get some IHS funds to do reimbursement out-of-pocket care, healthcare for enrolled and tribal citizens in this country. So the studies being put on between those two organizations, those of us on the council, we're all within urban Native community, within Boston, Baltimore regions. And so we're all coming together and helping to put this study together. It's like with the IDAC, we're figuring out what questions, how to reach people, But also similar with IDAC, there's just not a lot of data taken on Native people. We're always left out of data collection. Always. We're always left out. And so there's just so much that we don't know on a data level. Like on the individual level and the community level, there's a lot that we do know that's going on, but we don't have any definitive hard numbers, or they're quite old, or the studies were not very good. They weren't complete. So we don't have that data to take to tribal leaders. We don't have that data to take to leaders in various parts of US government. So that's part of why these studies are so important. And so we're looking specifically at the equity of care around HIV and AIDS for urban natives in Baltimore and Boston. Neither place has Indian Health Service hospitals or clinics. If you are Native and you are eligible for IHS, you either have to travel a great distance to get to IHS, or you're going to use non-IHS health services. So there's a variety of issues with that. You could be talking to people who are not only non-Native, but don't even know that you exist. It's pretty shocking, some of the things I've had healthcare providers say to me over the years, including at health centers when I lived in Boston, including Fenway Health, which is the LGBT health center, so spaces that should especially be doing HIV, AIDS, and safer sex education and care. They have literally zero competency to work with Native people. They know nothing about us. They don't even think we exist. So there's a lot of problems with the level of care that we can get. And then within Native community, for a variety of reasons, we just don't talk a great deal about sexual health. We don't talk a great deal about reproductive health. We don't talk about safer sex. We don't talk about HIV and AIDS. There's a lot of stigma around it, and that has to change. So this study is really to see, what are we missing in our community? What do our people need? Because you can't address a problem, you can't fix the problem if you don't know exactly what that problem is.
Yeah, both of these projects are such meaningful work that are honestly going to have impact probably beyond our lifetimes, as far as like laying the groundwork of research and data collection that just hasn't, like you said, hasn't been done yet. And I think this work is incredibly meaningful to ensure that we're really starting to lay the foundation of how disabled natives can get the care that they need. Was there anything else related to that study that you wanted to highlight? Is there ways for folks to get involved, to hear more about this?
So I would say, I hope we have a list of the IDAC listening sessions ready and online for me to give you to go out for June 8th. I'm telling you that now in the hopes that I don't forget it.
Oh yeah, I'll make a note. I have a
Okay.
note about it. Yeah.
Yeah, because we should have that ready any day now. Yeah. I think the other thing, there's a couple of things I'd like to add about the HIV study. So I'm in my 40s now, and I was quite young when the AIDS epidemic began, but I do remember it. And I remember the things that were said about people who had AIDS. It was all quite derogatory, anti-queer, things that showed not only just complete ignorance, but also a complete lack of concern for people who were struggling with addiction. There were a lot of things that I just grew up hearing that I knew was wrong and that was also inaccurate. But I came of age in a time when you had TLC with left eye covering an eye with a condom, like, so I really grew up with wrap it up or die. And that's not the healthy attitude that I wish that I had grown up with, but also that's what I grew up with. And so even though HIV is not necessarily a death sentence anymore, as long as you're able to access care, and not everyone is, right, it's still something that we need to think about. We need to be concerned about, and we need to work on prevention. But I think a big part of that, it's not just about care and prevention and research. It's also about thinking that the people who are the most likely to get ill actually have value. Part of the reason the AIDS epidemic was allowed to run wild the way it was because we don't value gay men or men who have sex with men, regardless of what their identity is. We don't value people who are IV drug users. Just like with COVID, we don't value the majority of the people who have gotten sick and died or been left with long COVID and without the resources they need. And for me, HIV and AIDS, it's a pandemic. It's no different than COVID to me. It's a pandemic that we allowed to impact certain communities of people because we just don't value those people. And for me, these studies are really important and they're crucial, but they're a first step. They are one tiny step in a very long line of what we need to be doing to ensure. I don't care about a rights-based and an equality-based framework. I want justice. And this is just a tiny drop in the ocean working towards that. That's the other place that we have to get to. It's not just knowing what the problems are exactly. It's living in a society where we actually value everyone.
I think the idea that like every person has value, every body has value, no matter who it is, no matter what their experience is, what their life looks like, who they love, what's their background. Like the fact that like saying, oh, I think everybody should have access to care no matter who they are is like a radical thing to say. Like I've never understood that. I've never gotten that, but it just goes to show like it highlights all of the stigmas and such embedded systems of oppression that exist in the US that it's just so passive in people's minds of people that live in the US that because your value or your moral value on that community is not the same as mine and shouldn't override how we view them as individuals and how we find value in people. So I just think that's such an important point that is definitely needed to happen in the quote unquote health equality, quote unquote health equity, because even folks in those spaces sometimes don't always address those internalized stigmas against the folks that they're trying to help. So I think that's such a huge takeaway from this conversation.
I think one of the other things that COVID has especially highlighted for me is that those of us in the so-called US, regardless of who you are, what your background is, we have a very low bar for what we're willing to accept. We are just, I think in many ways, so psychologically beaten down and conditioned to accept nothing but scraps that the thought of anyone having their basic rights met somehow seems so radical.
Yeah.
You know, when the quarantines first began with COVID, I remember people fighting to be able to go back to work. And I remember thinking, why are you fighting to go to work and die for a company that doesn't care about you? You should be fighting the government to pay you to stay home. You should be fighting the government to give you health care because you do need to live. You're right. You need to live. But why are we not fighting for that? Why are we accepting so little? You know, I recall when Obamacare was first kind of it was being debated and going into effect and everything. One of the things that I was excited about, even though there was a great deal about it that I did not care for, was that students coming out of college weren't going to suddenly lose their health insurance because I did lose my health insurance. When I graduated from college, I was on my mom and stepdad's plan. I lost my health insurance and we had no health insurance plan in this country. And I graduated into a recession. I've spent my entire post-higher ed life living either unemployed or underemployed. There have been no good jobs. There have been no benefits to be had like health insurance or 401k or God forbid a pension. Those things don't exist anymore. And someone, I remember them saying on one of my social media feeds, I had to go without health insurance. Why shouldn't these other people? And I was just so shocked by that. I was like, yeah, I did too. but I shouldn't have had to. That's the point.
And doesn't mean that you would want to wish that onto somebody.
Yeah. Why do you think that because you suffered, others should suffer? No, and I don't know. We just have this I don't know. I don't quite have the words to describe it, but man, things are messed up in our thinking over here in the US. It's just wild.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's very much idea that everything has to be quote unquote earned and merit based. And for folks that are not employed or, like you said, underemployed, who may not have access to health insurance, kind of like, oh, well, what did they do wrong? And it's like, what? How did we get there? And it just goes back to how the whole system is structured, that you have to do a certain amount or be born into it to be able to access all of the things that you need. Where in the majority of the world, that's not how it works. So like you said, it's mind boggling. And I definitely resonate with that. So switching gears from a bit of the doom and gloom, talking about COVID, talking about healthcare, talking about the need to include people and all that stuff. I really like to end my conversations with centering joy and centering like care. And this is something that I didn't do myself. I have to credit some folks that center, dream building and futurism, which are primarily Black feminist psychologists who I had the pleasure of knowing at where I went to school. But yeah, I think finding joy in your life while navigating such an oppressive system is such an act of resistance to that system. And I think ending conversations in the podcast and in my own personal life, recentering the good and the good that brings value to your life and radically challenges all of the systems that exist, I think is a really good way to end these conversations, instead of just saying, okay, that's it. We just talked about Native disabled trauma, how people aren't included, and end there. And I think that's what, unfortunately, a lot of people do. They just throw up their facts and figures and they're done. But I think, like you mentioned earlier, you want to know what's not so good, and you also want to know the good, like what's going well, so we can center on that while addressing some other things. Anyways, that was a long-winded way to ask this question. What does disabled Native joy look like to you, and how do you find joy while resisting ableism, racism, and other forms of oppression?
I'll say that I feel like every time I get asked these questions along this line, I'm always like, man, I don't know what to say. I don't know if it's because I'm a journalist and I'm just like the harbinger of doom. I don't know. I feel sometimes like I'm way too mired in the ugly of the world to get to the joy part, but I'm working on it and trying to find more of that. And what is I don't even know.
Do you have any pets? Do you have any hobbies? Things like that you care?
Yeah, I feel like I'm supposed to give this big grand answer about what disabled Native joy looks like. And I'm like, I don't know exactly. But I'll say what some of the joyful moments are for me. I have 2 cats. I love them dearly. I am a proud queer cat lady. It's my choice. So sometimes it's just as simple as just sitting down with them. They don't have to do anything but just be cats, expecting me to take care of them, and they make me happy. It's sitting with books. It's when I get to go to bookstores and I get to see books by cool people that I know. That always makes me really excited. I get very excited when that's like, oh, I know them. And then, it's time with my friends. I have a really good group of people in my life that they're spread all over. So that's a little bit of a bummer. I wish we were all closer to one another physically, geographically, but I did a little Zoom happy hour Saturday evening with some disabled Native friends. That was wonderful. It's getting on the phone and just chatting for an hour. I'm planning a day at the lake with some friends for July. So it's I do have to really be very intentional about trying to fit joy into my life, and as well as rest. If I didn't really try hard to put those two things into my life, they just wouldn't be there. Yeah. I wish I had some grand answer about what the future would look like and what I want it to be. I don't exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. But joy is important. It can't always be trauma. It can't always be doom and gloom. There's got to be some moments of reprieve in there.
Yeah, definitely. And I was not expecting this grand answer. And I think folks listening can connect with the things that you mentioned and be able to reassess joy in their own lives and kind of center, whether that's their pets or their community, or just to be able to take a step back, like you said, and really be intentional about the care and wellness and rest that they bring into their lives. So no big earth shattering responses needed. I think even like the simplest answer of just being able to sit with a pet is really important and has so much value. So thank you so much, Jen. I was curious, for folks listening, can you tell them a bit about how they can support you, how they can follow and keep up with you, and if there's other Native disabled folks that you want to highlight so listeners can keep up with them too?
Yeah. So you can follow me and Crushing Colonialism on all the social media. Very easy to find. Jen with one N, Deer and Water, and Crushing Colonialism. Go to crushingcolonialism.org. On the bottom of the homepage is a newsletter sign up. We are going to be coming out very soon with a regular, really nice Indigenous creative publication. So that is a good way to get for that. It's a good way to find out about some of our exciting upcoming programming that we're working on. And if you are in the position, we always appreciate donations. So that's always very helpful. And then in terms of other disabled Indigenous people to follow, there are so many. And I know I'm going to forget some, so I'm just going to start naming names as they come to me. Johnny J, Sarah Young Bear Brown, Jules Edwards, Sharon Devanport, Hector Ramirez, Hosky Vinali, Kira Sherwood O'Regan. She is Mallory from Aotearoa, known as New Zealand, and she is wonderful. There's John Gilroy, who I don't know him personally, but he does a lot of really great work in Australia. Man, I know I'm forgetting people, but we're out there and we're doing work. We're in these communities doing the work. Anywhere you will find Indigenous people, you are going to find disabled people. So get to know us and start following us and supporting our work.
Perfect. We'll include those names and we'll have a transcript, and then we'll also link to some more folks in our show notes and highlight them on social media as well when sharing the podcast. If you're listening and you didn't catch those names, you're reading, you can't navigate online, we'll include those names in the show notes and on social media, so you'll be able to easily find Jen with one N, which I thought was clever, and then some other really great folks. So thank you so much, Jen. It's been an absolute pleasure to be able to share space with you, and I appreciate all of the time that you've given in planning this podcast. And yeah, I really look forward to working with you some more.
Same. Wado. Thank you.
Thank you, Jen, for being on today's episode and for sharing your lived experiences, insight, and resources with us.
Yes, and for a list of resources along with a non-exhaustive list of Native disabled folks Jen provided at the end of the episode to follow, visit our show notes to get that info readily available.
Our podcasts come out every other Thursday. Please like, rate, subscribe, and share the You First podcast with your friends, coworkers, and family. We want the important work of people like Jen to reach anyone interested.
Let them know that we're on all streaming platforms, and for more information and the transcript, visit disabilityrightsflorida.org/podcast.
The You First podcast is produced by Disability Rights Florida, a not-for-profit corporation working to protect and advance the rights of Floridians with disabilities through advocacy and education. If you or a family member has a disability and feel that your rights have been violated in any way, please contact Disability Rights Florida. You can learn more about the services we provide, explore a vast array of resources on a variety of disability-related topics, and complete an online intake on our website at disabilityrightsflorida.org. You can also call us at 1-800-342-0823. Thank you for listening to You First, the Disability Rights Florida podcast.